I'm Priya, and welcome to the How Round Is Your Roti podcast. This is a place where we discuss a wide range of topics aimed at South Asian women in particular, but of course, everyone is welcome to listen. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Today, I have with me Deepal Rai. Deepal is a GP with over 20 years of medical experience and is also an accredited transformational coach. She is the founder of Live, Lifestyle and Longevity and helps busy professionals, especially South Asians, to take control of their physical and mental health through evidence based lifestyle medicine, personalized coaching, and precision diagnostics. Her approach is tailored to address unique cultural and health risks to prevent chronic disease, reduce stress, and improve long term health so people can live longer, healthier lives doing things that matter most. Deepal, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Right, we're going to dive straight in because there's a lot to cover here. I personally think it's great that you're a practicing GP and also you started working in this new area. So, if you could, when we speak about lifestyle and longevity, what do you support people with?
So I help people live better for longer, and that's better physically, mentally, and socially. And so we're living longer, but not necessarily healthier. And actually, we're living longer with more chronic disease. So about three-quarters of all deaths globally are now due to chronic disease, such as heart disease. And in the latest health survey for England, about 40% of adults in the UK already live with at least one chronic disease. And that's not just like pensioners, it's actually people in their 40s and 50s. And when you think about it, that's pretty huge. And things like, stress, sleep issues, low energy, these things are becoming the norm. And the problem is that for many of us, we don't realize we're on the path to a chronic disease until it's too late, until we've been given a diagnosis. And so we know that lifestyle factors are really important in influencing our risk of chronic disease, but also how well we age. So, one of the things that when I work with someone, I often ask people to reflect firstly on, what do you want to be able to do when you're 80 years old, 90 years old? And for some people, that will be they want to be able to live independently by themselves, or they want to be able to walk without having a fall, or, for others, it might be that they want to have the energy to play with their grandchildren. And so we might take these things for granted, but actually, at that time of our life, it's going to be really critical. And for someone in their mid 40s, it might seem a little bit abstract trying to imagine myself as an 80-year-old or as a 90-year-old. But actually, it's really important that we think about that now and we do the preparation for that now because it will be too late if we don't. And the second thing that I ask people to think about is, what are your reasons for living? And I think this is incredibly powerful because for many people, particularly within the South Asian community, family is a big thing. So often I will hear people say, well, actually, I want to be around for my children, or I want to be around for my loved ones, or, my family. But more broadly, when I'm working with someone, I really want them to connect with, what are the things that matter to them? What's important to them? What gives their life meaning? Because actually, that's much more motivating. Um, that that will make somebody want to live and to look after themselves and create time for their health and their well-being. Um, because that rather than just set a goal for like, I want to join the gym, this is much more powerful. And I think um, a lot of us lead very, very busy lives. And I hear from people that they don't have the time to go to the gym or eat well. But actually, if we can get them to connect with those those things that really matter, I think that's really important in helping them create change. And so with my work, it's really about optimizing health span, which is that period of our life where we're living free of disease, free of disability, but more broadly, it's supporting people with mental health and their general well-being. And I do that through lifestyle medicine.
Yeah, there were shocking statistics just then. It's really surprising at how how bad it's getting for people. And I suppose, I'm in my 40s and I am hearing of more and more people suffering with heart disease, high cholesterol. So those chronic stresses are coming in now. You mentioned lifestyle medicine just then. So what is that and how can that help us?
So lifestyle medicine, it's firstly it's evidence based. So it's an evidence based practice where we're using lifestyle interventions to either prevent or treat chronic diseases such as the diseases you've mentioned, so diabetes, heart disease, high cholesterol, all of those things, and we're doing that through behavior change. So there are six key pillars within lifestyle medicine. So I'll run through those. So you've got sort of nutrition and healthy eating, physical activity, sleep, minimizing harmful substances, so alcohol, smoking, things like that, stress reduction and mental well-being, and the last one is social connection, so nurturing healthy relationships. So I really love this approach because it's very holistic. It really takes into account the connection between the body, the mind, social. And I think sometimes, with traditional medicine, it can be a bit compartmentalized. So, and largely, I think that's because of time constraints. So, where you're just looking at the physical and the body and you're managing an ailment, for example. Whereas with my approach, I really try to look at we try and look at the whole person and sort of consider what's going on for them, not just within their body, but within their mind, what's happening within their relationships. And I think taking that approach is important if we really want to be effective in creating change, but also really getting a good insight into what's happening for this individual. Um, so yeah, that's lifestyle medicine.
Sounds like a real holistic approach. Like I said, you're not just tackling that one area. And when you go to a doctor, I know that there are those time constraints that you have in for an appointment and it's 10 minutes. This is what's happening. All too often you'll get a prescription for something. But I love this approach of actually, when you spoke there about long-term relationships, personal relationships, if someone's going through a really stressful time in their personal relationships, it can impact their health. There's so many other things that can impact health that perhaps we don't tell a doctor or we don't connect the dots ourselves. So I think it's a wonderful approach to actually ask, well, what's going on in all the areas of your life to help put together something that can really support someone in the long term. Getting to that stage when we're 80 years old and still moving and still being able to go up the stairs. I know that's a goal of mine. Just be as independent as I can, as long as I can.
Yeah.
Um, this is a really interesting area, and I'm curious to know, how did you get into the lifestyle medicine and the longevity work?
So I think it started when we lived in Australia. So my husband and I lived in Australia, in Melbourne, with our two young kids for just under 8 years. We moved back to the UK a couple of years ago. And look, we loved it out there. Life was amazing. We made wonderful friends. So life was good, but it was also challenging because, we were both working, doing professional jobs, trying to raise our children, and we didn't have much family support. So I found that, I was always busy. I wasn't really looking after myself. I wasn't doing any exercise. Cooking felt like a chore. It was like on my to-do list as a right tick, get on to the next thing. And I was starting to feel stressed. I was starting to feel a bit burnt out. And I realized that, this isn't sustainable. And so actually, I also remember having a conversation with a really good friend who is a little bit older, but his children are the same sort of age. And, he'd exercise and really look after himself. And I remember having this conversation with him where I was like, so good that you exercise. And he said, well, when his children were born, he felt this sense of responsibility to look after himself. And that really hit me. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, yeah, I have a responsibility to myself, but I also have a responsibility to my children. And so I joined a HIT studio. I started doing HIT training. I started going for walks. down to the beach in the morning. And, we were really lucky, and I'm very grateful that we we lived in a place where I could walk down to the beach. And so at 5:30, 6 a.m., I'd walk down to the beach and I'd sit and I'd meditate. Um, and, there'd be hardly anyone there. It was honestly a magical time. And I started doing yoga at home. I started paying attention to what I was eating, and I noticed the benefits. I started to feel different within myself. I was less stressed. So, and the amazing thing was the benefits didn't, it wasn't just with me. I could see that this was having an effect on my family as well. And I could see the benefits for my children. So I think that was sort of my personal journey, and I could see the benefits, but also within my work. You know, every day I'll see people who are stressed, who are burnt out, who are experiencing sort of, lifestyle related illness. And with traditional medicine, I think we're really, really good at diagnosing and treating disease, but often we're quite reactive. So, and I've got a strong family history of type 2 diabetes and heart disease. And I thought, I don't want to wait for a diagnosis. And similarly with my patients, I don't want to be giving them a diagnosis when I know that there's so much we can do in that preventative space. And so that's what led me, I suppose, professionally to look and then train in lifestyle medicine. I also then went on to train as a coach. And I think that's been really valuable because I think often as a GP, we can be quite, or I'll speak for myself, you can end up being quite directive and telling people, you need the guidelines suggest you need to do X number of minutes of exercise per week, or you need to cut down your saturated fats. But actually, unless you're really working with the person in front of you, that may not be a realistic, goal for them. And I think with coaching, it's really enabled me to empower people with skills and really work with the person who's sitting in front of you to say, well, look, this could be, really helpful for you. For example, if we could incorporate some strength training into your week, that would be great. How would that work, or how can we make that happen? And so it's about figuring out what's going to work for this person, for their family commitments, their work, their lifestyle, and that's much more effective. So, um, yeah, so I went on to train as a coach and sort of bringing it all together. I guess that then led me to found Live Lifestyle and Longevity, because I wanted to deliver a service where I could give people time. And I'm naturally very detailed in my approach. And sometimes within my NHS role, because of time constraints, it can be difficult to deliver that service. So I wanted to design a service where I can give people time, I can be detailed, we can do that sort of whole person approach.
That sounds brilliant, and I love that it's come from a place of personal experience. You've lived through that change that you're now encouraging others to make. You've also got a coaching approach, which, I really relate to being a coach and the things that you're saying. Everyone has a unique circumstance. We're all different individuals. Our lives are set up differently. So giving a blanket approach to someone, like you said, like, "I'll do this exercise this many times a week," often doesn't work. People worry about how they can fit things in it, and it becomes a pressure. Whereas the coaching approach does look at their lifestyle, what their challenges are, how they can overcome them with that support and accountability that comes through coaching. I know when I started coaching about 5 years ago now, it really changed my outlook too. And similarly to you, when you've got kids, you just think, "I need to be able to keep up with them. I want to be here for them." And priorities switched for me at that time as well. And I think lots of mums and just generally everyone actually can benefit from assessing their priorities and how they want to live those lives and having those deep questions, as scary as they are when you're looking forward. What do you want your life to be like when you're older? it can really focus the mind on the changes that you can make today. So thank you. That was brilliant to hear. And I think there is that gap in the market as well. And I speak to lots of business owners who actually have started their business because they see a need and because they've experienced that gap or they want to support others in getting to a good place. So I think it's a fantastic business. For this podcast in particular, we focus on South Asian women because often I always feel like we're a neglected group. There's not a lot of research done on South Asian women, especially here in the UK. In South Asian culture, like you said earlier, there are higher rates of diabetes, especially. I know more people suffering with high cholesterol and heart conditions, unfortunately. So, for South Asian women in particular, why is this important for them?
Yeah, well, I think you've touched on a couple of the things already. We do have an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease. But the other thing that we're seeing is that we're being diagnosed at a younger age and also at a lower BMI. So, we've got an increased risk of those conditions. There was a study done that looked at heart disease heart disease risk within South Asians in the UK. And yes, the risk is higher in men, but also within in South Asian women, our risk of heart disease was comparable to white European men. So we've certainly got an increased risk. We've got an increased risk of visceral fat deposition as well, which is the harmful fat. So that's where the fat is deposited around our organs and increases the risk of chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease and so on. And the thing with that is, we can have a normal BMI or be thin and still have high visceral fat. So that's something to just be mindful of. I think another thing that I would mention is that I think with traditional healthcare, it doesn't always specifically cater for South Asian patients or individuals. For example, if I'm giving somebody lifestyle intervention or we're discussing lifestyle interventions, like let's say nutrition, unless I'm looking for specific resources, a lot of the information is generic. And like we said earlier, if we're going to be effective, we need to really understand that, I need to give advice or work with somebody in a way that is specific and taking into account what they're eating. So if they're eating roti and dal and things like that, I need to be able to tailor the guidance. So I think that's another thing to consider. Um, Another thing I'd say is that, and this sort of applies to me as well, for many of us South Asian women growing up, we may not have necessarily had the awareness around health, or we may have received mixed messages around what constitutes a healthy diet. So I've grown up in a Punjabi family, and things that you're told things like ghee or ghee and pinya and things like that are good for you. So it's about navigating and sort of gaining that awareness as well. I think the other thing I'd sort of like to say on this is culturally, um, I think for many of us, sort of South Asian women, particularly in them in sort of midlife, I think of us as a sandwich generation, and I know we've spoken about this before, but I think it's worth highlighting. So for many of us, we're caring for children, but we're also looking after or have some care input towards, with our aging parents or family members. And that there's an added responsibility with that. And look, don't get me wrong, one of the things I love about our culture is the fact that we have these networks and we're close, but it can sometimes mean that, like when I see South Asian women, we might prioritize, looking after our children or family members and then neglect our own health and well-being. And I think that's where I really want us to I really want us to sort of pause and say, well, hold on, look, I need to look after myself as well. My health matters. I really need to take care of myself and my well-being. And so I've designed a program they've called the Midlife Reset, which is an 8-week program where essentially it's really looking at and understanding the changes that are happening during this time of our life. So we know that there are changes that are happening in the body. We've talked about increased risk of chronic disease, but also hormonal changes, the perimenopause, the menopause, understanding how that's impacting us, understanding the changes that are happening mentally. So that might be increased stress or mood changes with, irritability and hormonal fluctuations. But socially, things are can be changing. So relationships might be changing as a result, or as I've mentioned, we've got the caring responsibilities. Or for some people, for some women, they might have older kids, and it may be adjusting to sort of empty nest type thing. So the program is designed to sort of really take that into account. And so we do a couple of sessions where we're optimizing physical health. And then we may go on to do further diagnostics, and then a couple of sessions on mental well-being. And I don't think we've spoken about this, but I have trained in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a therapy that I like to think of it as it sort of helps you develop psychological flexibility. So rather than change what we're thinking and the content of our thoughts, it helps us to respond to our thoughts differently. So it's about being flexible in the way that we're thinking. But it also helps us to, or teaches us strategies for managing and accepting painful or difficult thoughts and feelings rather than suppress them. And the other sort of key part of it is taking committed action towards your values and the things that matter. So we do a couple of sessions on mental well-being using coaching, but also ACT, and then a session on social well-being where we're really looking at optimizing relationships. So that again may involve coaching and communication models, boundary setting, things like that. But the idea really is behind the program that it's allowing, in this case, South Asian women, just gives them that time to just pause, to reflect on their health and just find out where they're at, but also understand their unique risk factors, optimize their health and well-being, um, but also build lifestyle sort of changes or habits that work within their culture, within their sort of family, their and all their taking all those other things into account. And as I said earlier, the that's likely to have a ripple effect. So not only on the woman but on her family. And I often think, we do so much for our children, don't we? We invest in their education, and if you're like me, we're driving them around to a million clubs on the weekend. But
Definitely.
what about right? What about their health? You know, what are we doing to invest in their health? And I think that's something that is really worth thinking about as well, because when we make these changes and create good habits at home, that's going to influence our children, and they're going to carry that on, and that's going to inform their future. So really important.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. I agree with everything that you've said there. Starting with, the way that we're raised, and in our families, I'm Punjabi background as well. It's like keep eating this, and the amount of sweets that are available. Diwali.
It's just, don't get me wrong.
It is. It's all fantastic, but it's just how to manage that and stop yourself when you need to stop and realizing that. And also, like you said, teaching your children, like it's all there, but how much, you know, is is the right amount for you at your age at that time of day and understanding those types of things. Yeah. So and there's so much you just said there. That midlife reset sounds like it would be so beneficial for so many women. And I think, start of the year a lot of people have those resolutions like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. But having someone with you to go through that journey, I think can be so much more supportive and help you get through it than saying, oh, I will lose weight this year, or I will focus on my nutrition this year, and then just leaving it in the ether. As we know with coaching, it can help by having someone with you, guiding you through that and seeing what's applicable to your life. You mentioned that sandwich generation, and we're definitely, I'm like, we're getting there. Parents are getting older, still got young. We're going to be stressed. We're going to be pulled in different directions. For someone who perhaps doesn't have a lot of time in their week, where would you tell them to prioritize that time?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think this applies to us all. Um, I think that the first thing I'd say is that there is a lot of information out there. And I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts. There's so much that we can take in. And I'd say, look, tune into your body and figure out what works for you. So, just as a quick example, recently, I listened to a podcast where the speaker was very, very fit and, she did a lot of exercise and she was talking about what she was eating and it was a lot of carbs. I thought, oh, right, okay. I ended up then wearing a continuous glucose monitor, to monitor my sugar just out of interest for about a week. I did get a bit obsessed with it. So just be mindful of that. That's not so healthy, but it was really insightful because every time I ate roti or white rice and dal, my sugar spiked. And so I had to take that advice that she'd given. I had to apply that to myself because I've got, yes, I need carbs when I'm training, but I've also got to be mindful of my carb tolerance and what carbs I have. So basically, with that one, it's just tune into you, make sure you personalize any information. And the second thing I'd say is like, I do a lifestyle assessment, maybe just do a little scan of those pillars and see, does anything really stand out as something that needs, work? And then just small, sustainable, just start with something small. It could just be, if it's, just going for a 5-minute walk, it could be something really small that's achievable, but maybe just focus rather than trying to do everything at once. If you haven't, if you don't know what your bloods are or you don't know what your blood pressure and things, just maybe having a check with your GP just to get all that done might be a good place to start as well. And then with regards to the pillars, if I go through those, I think the first one I would start with is sleep, because sleep impacts all the others. So if you're not sleeping great, focus on that. And both on try to aim for 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, but also the quality of the sleep. So just, I mean, again, I could talk so much about each of these, but very quickly with this one, I'd say try and, avoid screens for an hour before bed, have regularity, all those things. We know that. With the second thing I'd say, stress, be aware of like, how is stress showing up in your life? How is it showing up in your body? Sometimes we might be feeling stressed and we're just not aware of that. So really just checking in and noticing that. And then think through things that help you when you're stressed. What are your strategies? So, one of the things that I do when I work with people is we build a mental well-being toolkit, which is practical strategies that people can then use to manage stress and mental well-being more broadly. But, that might be just pausing, reflecting, breathing, going out for a walk. I think a daily gratitude practice is a really simple but effective way of just helping us. And I think you said this earlier, just changing our focus. So that could be something that works. Now with nutrition, we're hearing a lot about, increasing protein in our diet, but also try and have a diversity of plants with every meal. So we know that. And I'd say for South Asian women, just be mindful of your carbs tolerance. If you are having carbs, like you said, what time of day, try and make them complex, sort of whole meal carbs. And that does make a difference. And so when I had the monitor on, when I was having brown rice, it didn't spike my sugar. And that's my personal experience, but just being mindful of that. Then with movement, any form of movement is good. So find something that you enjoy. And if you can incorporate strength training into your week, that it has lots of benefits. We know that building muscle mass and strength increases longevity. as we get older, if we are stronger, then it reduces our risk of falls. And having a fall when you're, 80, 90 years old can not only increase your risk of death, but have real sort of, catastrophic effects on your quality of life. So um, I just, things like, with alcohol, avoiding alcohol or really minimizing it. Now, with relationships, maybe just reflecting on the quality of your relationships, but we do need that social connection. It's incredibly important. It does link, it does enhance longevity when you have those nurturing, healthy relationships. And actually, we can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely. And that's because we need to have connection where we're feeling valued, we're feeling heard, we're feeling like we've been seen. So really trying to nurture those connections. And the last thing, and we've touched on this earlier as well, is purpose. You know, when I do an assessment with somebody, I usually send them out a questionnaire beforehand. And I've had feedback recently where there's a question about purpose. And, the feedback, it was really positive in that it really prompted people to do that reflection and that exploration and really think about, well, what is my sense of purpose? And so really trying to connect with that, because I think once you have that, you everything else will flow, everything else will be in alignment. And so, have a think about what are the things that are important to you, what gives your life meaning. Um, yeah.
Some big questions there as well. You know, it covers so much, that health, lifestyle, longevity, it covers so much, and purpose. As a coach, I've got a challenge on at the moment, which is about finding purpose, passion, and exploring things. And it's a big question, and I think for some people, yeah, take a notebook and start thinking about those things. 'Cause you said it can help towards that alignment in life, and again, providing that motivation then for all the things that you want to do later on, and it's brilliant. So we've mentioned about chronic diseases and things happening to people earlier in life, so happening more in the 40s, 50s rather than later in life.
Yes.
And then sometimes that having a diagnosis can prompt people to seek out help. On the other side, there are people now in their 40s, and maybe because there is so much information out there. You mentioned the podcast. There's so many tips and things that people can take up. It can be quite difficult to choose what's right for them. So when we talk about proactive health, what tests would you recommend that would give people an insight into their midlife health? I know you mentioned touched on earlier advanced diagnostics. So for people that really want to get into it and want that level of detail, what would be good for them?
So I think, as I suggested earlier, maybe just starting off with basics. So getting your like metabolic bloods done, and you can do that through your GP. So knowing what like your HbA1c and your diabetes blood tests are, your cholesterol panel. Now, for people who are more proactive and want to do further tests, some of the things that I think are worth considering are sort of more advanced lipid panels. So, when we talk about precision diagnostics, I think of this as so a lot of traditional diagnostics screen for disease, whereas with precision diagnostics, what we're trying to do is really screen for risk. So trying to find things early. And I like to think of it as opportunities. Can we pick something up where we can intervene early so that we can prevent disease? So some of the other blood tests you might want to consider are things like ApoB. So this is another lipid marker, but the evidence suggests that it does have important predictive value. So if your levels are raised, it does put you at increased risk of heart disease. So again, being mindful, being aware of that is helpful. The other blood test is called LP little a. Now, this is a genetically determined blood test, so you only need to have it once. And again, we know that even very modest elevations in the LP little a can significantly increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. Now, it's worth considering this, particularly if you're South Asian and there's a family history of early heart disease. It's worth thinking about this because if the levels are raised, it might mean that we're then much more aggressive in managing all those lifestyle factors that we've been discussing today. Really getting on top of the diet and being physically active, all those other things, making sure your blood pressure, everything is well controlled. But it might mean for some people that, they may consider medications earlier as well. So that's sort of bloods. The second thing to think about might be a body composition scan. So, you know, what, so this is a scan that uses X-rays and it gives us an idea of our body makeup essentially. And why is this helpful? So, firstly, it will give us an indication of the body fat stores. And in particular, it will tell us where that fat is. So it will tell us the visceral fat that we spoke about earlier. So the fat around the organs, that's helpful to know. And because, as I said, things like your BMI won't tell us that. The second thing, it gives us information around muscle mass. So it will tell us what your muscle mass is. And as I touched on earlier, this is important for several reasons. We know that there's a correlation between muscle mass and strength and um, longevity, but also it means that we can. I suppose with all of this, really, I mean, I'll mention the third thing is it gives us an indication of bone density as well. Knowing this is helpful because yes, it sort of helps to identify risk early, but it also means we can then personalize the your longevity plan based on the scan. So, for example, if the scan shows that your muscle mass is suboptimal or below the range, we can then really target that. So, with nutrition, we can really look at how we're going to increase your protein intake. But also, we might really focus on upping strength and resistance training you know, based on that. So it's giving us information so that we can actually tailor the lifestyle interventions. And the third thing we might want to think about is a VO2 test. So a VO2 test measures your cardiorespiratory fitness. Essentially, it's assessing how efficiently your body uses oxygen, and it's a strong predictor of long-term health and longevity. So this is tested. So you'll either run on a treadmill or go on a bike, and you be strapped up to a mask, and it measures your oxygen and carbon dioxide levels and works that out. So again, if you're really into fitness and you want to know, that might be another thing that's worth considering.
There's quite a range there, and I think it is a mindset, I suppose, for people who want to get prepared for later in life. I know when we talk about women in their 40s, 50s and heading into menopause, that bone density one we always get told, all women start losing mobility and muscle mass. And I suppose for someone it might be, well, at what stage do I need to work on that? Or how bad is it now so that I need to know what to do to improve it? So I think those types of tests, if you've got, the means to do it, it sounds like they can be really helpful in at least creating a plan, the right plan for your body. So again, it's individualized care.
But I think that's key. I think what you've said there is key. I think it's about um, figuring out, what your unique needs are. It's not about just having tests for the sake of having a test. It's about personalizing that to the individual. And then it can also be really helpful way of tracking progress as well. So if you have some form of assessment now, it can be really nice to see, that you've improved your muscle mass or you've got your lipids down. When you repeat those, it can be a really useful way of tracking your progress as well.
And especially, like you said, if you've got a history of heart disease in your family or diabetes in your family, having the regular tests, I imagine, just give you some comfort that you're on the right path. And if you're not, what steps you can take to try and correct that as you go through. But yeah, Deepal, it's been fantastic, like hearing all this information and from someone who's so knowledgeable and wants to be there to support people, especially South Asians, who I think don't get as much focus in the general media when it comes to health, nutrition. And because our diets are different, when you said earlier about having dal roti and what it can do to your blood sugar, I was like, okay, maybe I should check that out because our diets are so Western diets, and I suppose even there's a lot of South Asians that may be vegetarian, vegan, and I became vegetarian a couple of years ago, so I did it with a nutritionist, and she gave some like, okay, you'll need to have extra sources of protein in different areas, and I found that really useful at that time, and taking that individual approach. Um, I think can be
Yeah.
really beneficial.
And I would say here, um, having balance is important. So maybe just, sometimes I think about it in terms of 80-20. 80% of the time I'll try to eat well, do my training and have good sort of habits and lifestyle practice. But there's a balance. Like if my mum's here and she's made roti, that's also important, so it's about finding that balance. I think that's important. And, I'd want to say that as well, that it's not, like I talked about the wearing the continuous glucose monitor earlier. I became a bit obsessed with it. So I would be constantly looking at my blood sugars. So, you don't want to be extreme either. It's about, being sensible, being proactive, and understanding that, yeah, nobody wants to have disease and it's hard thinking about that as well, isn't it? And sometimes some of us go into denial where we think actually it's not going to happen. But the more we can think about it, the more we can prepare, we're reducing that risk. But also, it means that, we're staying on top of things, aren't we? And I think it's just, yeah, finding that balance.
Excellent. So if there's anyone listening who wanted to find out some more information or get in touch with you, I will add some links to this podcast, but where can they find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. And I think you're going to pop my website details on there as well. So feel free to check that out or send me an email. Yeah, I look forward to connecting with people.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for your time today and sharing all that valuable information.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been really lovely. Thank you.